Every GOAT debate starts the same way: Messi and Ronaldo. It eventually ends up in a top 10 debate, and players like Pele, Maradona and Johan Cruyff get brought into the equation. Somebody then says that, those old players are terrible and that we shouldn't respect them. But nobody ever answers the question: how good were old footballers really? And if Pele, Maradona and Johan Cruyff were born in 2000, would they still be elite? There's a wall that comes up every single time that we have this debate. You can't compare across eras. And to an extent that's fair. Johan Cruyff was smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, and Diego Maradona's off-field antics were more than well documented. Even more so, these guys played on ploughed pitches with footballs as heavy as a small dog with a little bit of rain. Furthermore, the rules really favoured those defenders. In the past, you could slide tackle somebody from behind and get nothing more than a tap on the shoulder from a referee and a quiet word with no free kick and no cards given. So yes, the contexts are wildly different, but here's what I want to do. Set that aside for a second, because I think the question, and the more interesting question, is about talent, about what these players actually were and whether or not that talent would actually translate. Here's something I think modern football fans vastly underestimate, and that's the physicality of vintage football. Picture the best version of Pep Guardiola's Barcelona team: the tiki-taka, the free-flowing football, beautiful passes pinged across the park. Iniesta picks up the ball on the half turn and moves into space. And then bam, he gets clattered by some random defender. No card, no free kick. That's what it was like every single game for these retro players. The best players, the Johan Cruyffs, the Pelés, well, they were the targets. You were a star player, well, congratulations, you're now getting battered around the park for 90 minutes. There was no protection, and it wasn't just for individuals, it was a systematic decision to take out the star player. So when people say old players had it easier, well, I would push back on that specific point. The physicality was completely different, and if anything, surviving as a creative player was even more difficult in those eras. Now, and this is important, that doesn't mean the modern game is actually physically easier. In fact, it's just as difficult, if not even more difficult, just in a completely different way. The confrontation is gone, but the intensity, well, it's off the charts. The modern footballer barely gets a second every single time they receive the ball. I'm sure most of you have seen those body cam footages of the actual time that a player gets on the ball, and it is ridiculous to have that kind of perspective. The press is constant, it's organised, and it's completely relentless. 90 minutes of that is a completely different kind of suffering. And tactically, the game is infinitely more complex. Every single player is a cog. If you watch a highlight reel of Pele and Maradona, it's individual sparks of brilliance. And compared to the modern day, it's almost chaotic how free each player is. But watch a Premier League game in contrast and you'll see that one player out of position can break an entire system. The margin is tiny and every single player on the pitch is an elite physical athlete. The worst player on a Premier League squad has access to elite nutrition, elite recovery and elite performance staffs. And the average player now would be completely unrecognizable compared to the average player 40 years ago. So if the modern game is deeper, more intense, and more physically demanding, what does that mean for our players like Johan Cruyff, Maradona, and Pele? Drop prime Maradona into Old Trafford this weekend, and you would see him get found out without any of those extra things. But that's a completely unfair test. The real question is, if Pele or Maradona were born in 2001 with access to elite academy, elite pitches, elite recovery staffs, and elite performance staffs, would they still be the best? And personally, I'm a firm believer that cream will rise to the top. And the players that they were competing against weren't all bad either. Think of guys like Franz Beckenbauer and Bobby Moore, the top and era-defining defenders. And these players were still the best by some margin in these creative areas. That tells me something fundamental about their talent. That kind of talent is era agnostic. It doesn't matter where it is, it will show up to the fullest extent. So here's where I land on all of this. For the average player, yes, the modern player is definitively better. With access to modern scouting networks, a player from every single corner of the world can be concentrated in one pool. A kid in Senegal, Japan, or even Uzbekistan will find their way to the top level so long as they're good enough, and this was not the case 40 years ago. That only serves to raise the floor and make the average player better. But for the greats, the all-time legends, the conversation is different. Their talent would have found a way. You don't dominate an era by beating up on bad players. You dominate an era by being the best by some margin than your counterparts. And that quality doesn't just disappear when the era changes. So is the modern player better than the retro one? Broadly, yes. But if your takeaway from that is that Pele, Maradona, or Johan Cruyff would be completely fraudulent in this era, well then you're missing the point entirely. The game got better and they would have gotten better with it. And if you enjoyed this video, well, do me a favor and subscribe.